Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Smoya Sandiford Basden, Human Resource Analyst at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. I welcome you, our online viewers, to this Zoom platform, thanking you for joining us at this webinar entitled The Economic Cost of Natural Disasters, Preventative Measures to Save You. I would like to take this time to acknowledge the Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, Major General Retired Rodney Smart. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, and all other attendees at this webinar. So this webinar is brought to you by Domus Windows and Doors Limited in collaboration with the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month Multi-Sectoral Committee. Today's presenters are Ms. Kamira Gulston, Hazard Mitigation Specialist at the ODPM, Mr. Terence Ott, CEO at Domus Windows and Doors Limited, Mr. Richard Siharak, Divisional Manager at Demas Building Solutions, Mr. Mikey Joseph, who's the former president of the Trinidad and Tobago Contractors Association. He is also the director of SMAL Engineering Services Limited. Our final presenter for this afternoon is Mr. Jaron Michael Hackett, retirement advocate at Guardian Life of the Caribbean. Before I present our speakers, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content and share it with your colleagues. We are inviting comments and questions that will be addressed at the end of the discussion portion. So feel free to insert your comments and questions in the question box. Finally, we kindly ask all of our online viewers to mute your mics so that disruptions are minimized. So at this time, I am going to hand over to Ms. Kamira Gulston, who is going to start our webinar. She will be presenting on the lasting effects of adaptive building measures. So Kamira, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kamira Gulston, and today we'll be presenting with you adaptive measures to prepare for the impacts of disasters. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we are affected by a number of hazards: tropical cyclones, earthquakes, and flooding, just to name a few. Disasters, however, are dependent on our vulnerability and inability to prevent, prepare, and respond effectively to the impacts of a particular hazard. So the aim is to achieve minimal to no injury, damage, and loss through the disaster risk reduction framework. So disaster risk reduction is an all-encompassing multi-sectoral concept. There are complex solutions, but also simple ones that can be implemented by individuals, their families, and communities. So we all have a part to play to decrease exposure and vulnerability and increase adaptive investments. So the steps to disaster management is systematic. Next slide, please. So we need to think about how can we mitigate disasters, how can we better prepare for disasters, how can we efficiently respond to a disaster, and how can we recover in the shortest possible time. So preparation is important because this enhances economic, social, and cultural resilience. Effective preparation for disaster events include multiple strategies to reduce, remove the impact of hazards and to increase resilience. So currently there is a governance structure in place to guide countries in effectively reducing disaster risk. So we see on the screen here, there are two tiers. We have at the international level, the United Nations has set the stage by encouraging countries to sign onto the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. At the regional level, we see that there is a comprehensive disaster management strategy in place, which is implemented by CDMA member states, which includes Trinidad and Tobago. So let's go into a little more detail. Next slide, please. So the Sendai framework has 4 priority areas. So we see all the priority areas recognized on the screen here, where we have to understand the disaster risk. We have to strengthen how we respond. We have to ensure that we are able to better prepare and respond to the disasters in a coherent and comprehensive way. So currently, there is also the Comprehensive Disaster Management Framework, CDM for short, which is a regional roadmap for building resilience to hazards. And this has a specific aim with 4 priority areas as well. So next slide, please.
I think this is
next slide.
The next one is my slide.
Okay, so sorry. All right, so we consider disaster reduction a priority, and we have the frameworks in place, but here are a few tips that we have to ensure that we can enhance our flood preparedness and response. So we have to ensure that we have electrical appliances at least 12 feet above assumed flood level, ensure that we have drainage infrastructure around your home clear and free from blockage, seal cracks around your home with a waterproof compound to prevent floods, water seepage. Grade your lawn away from your home to ensure that there is some form of free flow of the flood water away from your home. Get a recognized professional to conduct ground assessments so that you're aware of your flood susceptibility, and reinforce the roofs, windows, and doors. So you'll see these tips being shared for the entire month of May as part of the Cabinet approved National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month. And you could also check out ODPM's website and the social media pages. My colleagues will go more into detail throughout this presentation and produce more tips so that you can properly prepare for disasters and manage your risk. But just as a reminder, disaster preparedness is everyone's responsibility. Invest today to improve your disaster resiliency. Over to you, Samoya.
Thank you so much, Ms. Galston, for your informative presentation. You certainly gave us some great insight. And now I am going to introduce the CEO of Domus Windows and Doors, Mr. Terry Ott, who will speak on climate change, flood-resistant doors, and impact-resistant windows and doors as offered by Domus Company. Welcome again, CEO Ott.
Thank you very much, Samoya. So a little bit about Domus. We're a local manufacturer here, manufacturing a range of products and specifically for the Caribbean. We have a wide range of hurricane resistant and security products, and we're now also expanding into flood resistant windows and doors. So there have been numerous flood events in Trinidad over the past century. This is an example of what happened after Hurricane Brett in 1993. And you'll see that the flooding is extensive. Mikey will go into some of the areas that where this occurs, but it certainly is an issue and should not be ignored. In 2018, which I remember very well, there were severe flooding in a number of different areas. In particular, I remember Caroni, where the highways, north-south highways, actually turned into dams rather than highways with very little escape. And there was a lot of flooding in the area, but that occurred throughout the countryside, really. In 2018, the floods actually caused about $2.5 billion of damage. What happened? Flood waters rose above the ground floor level. Water eventually entered virtually every home, and with it, it carried in debris, sewage, and really a lot of other disgusting stuff. Appliances were ruined, ground floor furniture destroyed, interior finishes were damaged, and in some cases, there was also structural damage. Many cases, residents were driven from their homes, in some cases for quite long periods of time, and the economic cost was horrendous. In terms of reducing flood damage risk, first of all, we can adopt the measures for sites surrounding homes as outlined by the ODPM. But everybody has a responsibility to determine the highest ever flood level for your property, and then to seal, as was mentioned earlier, seal the exterior building envelope to above historic flood levels. You should also not forget about the shutoff valves for the main sewage line to prevent backflow from the sewage. And you should install flood resistant doors which prevent water, debris, sewage, and so on getting into the property and damaging its contents. So if flood levels exceed the window openings, then you need to go further and install flood resistant windows as well as the door. Now here's an example of a flood resistant door that we tested in our Trinidad laboratory. And you'll notice this is an entrance door, which many people already have in their home. So that deals with floods from my point of view, and let's turn now to hurricanes. A lot of people think that Trinidad is exempt from hurricanes, simply because a lot of the hurricanes go north and pass into other territories. But rest assured, there have been a number of hurricanes, deadly hurricanes, in fact, over the past years. There are 3 of them here in 1933, 63, and 74, all of which caused death and severe damage. But in addition, there have been a lot of other storms, severe storms, that have caused a variety of different flooding and other damage. And you can see the list of some of those below. And if you think that Trinidad is exempt, these are some pictures from the archives. And as you can see, this property was absolutely destroyed. This is a newspaper article from around the time where there was 11 deaths. And here again is absolute destruction that occurred from hurricanes. So Trinidad is not at all exempt. And in fact, it's getting worse. The risk is getting worse because over the past 100 years, temperatures have risen approximately 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And since 81, the average rate of surface temperature has doubled. So the rate of increase of temperature is actually accelerating. Water temperatures have now increased to the point where year-round there's more than 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And we know that once the temperature exceeds 79 degrees Fahrenheit, hurricanes can form. The warmer the water temperature, the more that happens. And the other thing too that's happening is that with global warming, the hurricanes are becoming stronger and more destructive. They're also intensifying earlier. Previously, most of the hurricanes passed the Caribbean as tropical storms and then moved on to perhaps hit the United States after they gained strength. But recently, we've had 3 hurricanes in the last 3 years where they've become Category 5 hurricanes, striking the Caribbean, before they needed to intensify. These hurricanes, more intense hurricanes, are delivering more rain, which means more flooding. And they also cause a lot more damage and economic loss. So why do hurricanes cause building damage? Now here's something that most people don't realize, that once your window or door is broken, then wind forces or pressure inside a building builds up and eventually lifts the roof off. So typically what happens is the windows or doors are knocked out either by flying debris or in this case, some combination of flying debris and wind force. You can see here that the large window was knocked out for some, or simply pushed out by the wind force. The hurricane got inside the building, built up pressure, and then it exploded from the inside out, which is typically what happens in just about all of the roof failures in a hurricane. Why is that? Well, as the pressure builds up, it has nowhere to go, and so it needs an escape valve. So once you get into the more intense hurricanes, as we've recently experienced in the 150 to 180 mile an hour areas that have gone just north of Trinidad, the lift on a 1,000 square foot roof could be as much as 20 or 30 tons. When that occurs, there's nothing you can do to the roof to hold it on. Although there are many things that can be done to strengthen the roof, and those shouldn't be ignored. So how do you stop the windows and doors from blowing in? Remember that the frames, that the wind force can be one of them. So the frames, the mullions, the sashes, and the other structural elements need to be strong enough to stand up to the highest wind speeds, which are now getting up to 150, 180 miles an hour. Secondly, it could be windborne debris. So you need glazing that is capable of surviving multiple missile strikes. This requires very strong laminate glass to absorb the kinetic energy. And the last thing is that the glazing needs to be glued into the frames to prevent it from pulling out. So if you have rubber gasketed windows, the glass can bend, or any little thing can knock it out, and they just pop out. So if the glass is not glued in, then it will probably fail in a hurricane. The other thing, just to show you what happens to regular glass, and why it can fail easily in a hurricane. This is tempered glass. And you can see one blow from any kind of missile or anything else, the tempered glass just explodes. And regular single pane glass is not much better. And then this third slide shows how laminate glass can accept multiple blows without allowing the hurricane to. And as you can see from these videos, not only is it good to protect from hurricanes and floods, but it also provides security at the same time. So how do we test laminate glass? Well, you can do it in a test laboratory. Here's an example. This is West Palm Beach. And these are 3 missile strikes. So this is our newly developed economical hurricane line. It's quite inexpensive, affordable by anybody, but as you can see, it will certainly stop flying debris. The other thing you can do if you wish is to, especially with the high impact stuff, laminate glass, is to test it with a sledgehammer. And here's an example. Try again. You're not getting in very well. So this is a good example of how high impact glass can stop pretty much any kind of missiles. The next thing is to test for wind load, in other words, wind pressure. And the way we do that, we have the only laboratory in the Eastern Caribbean. And so we can put a test unit against the wall and then provide suction to actually put the pressure on the wall, on the test unit. Here is a door strapped to the test wall. This is the suction manifolds. And here's an example of what happens when the wind pressure gets to be too much. Now, in this case, the window stood up to 258 miles an hour. It was only when the wind pressure got to 263 miles an hour, which is 70 miles an hour higher than any hurricane that's ever hit the Caribbean, that it finally broke. So you want that kind of strength in a window to make sure that the wind pressure is not going to break it. So in conclusion, flooding in Trinidad is going to happen again. If it didn't happen today, it certainly will be happening, but there are ways to avoid the damage. And every citizen of the country can be protected from flood and hurricane risk at an affordable cost. Do what you can do. If you can't do everything, at least pick the most vulnerable part and do that. The other thing too is the reason for this webinar is that many governments, institutions, and individuals are unaware of the causes of hurricane building damage and how to prevent the damage, mainly to keep the wind pressure on the outside. Risk from debris and wind load is very real. If you've gone to some of the other islands, in recent years, you'll certainly see that. And window and door failure is the leading cause of roof failure and other severe damage in the Caribbean. So, Sir Moya?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ott. Presentation was well done. Thank you. And I'm sure our viewers were able to gain quite a lot of information from it. So now I'm going to introduce Mr. Richard Siharak, Divisional Manager of Demas Building Solutions, who will now speak on roofing resilience. Welcome, Mr. Siharak. Sorry.
Hi, good evening, Samoya. Thanks. Okay, just a little bit about Demas Building Solutions, or DBS. Demas Building Solutions is a division of General Packaging Limited, and we are the marketing and sales division for Demas Roofing Systems. As well, Demas Roofing Systems is another division of General Packaging Limited, founded in 1997. For over 23 years in a group, and we currently hold TTBS certification too, and we are registered with TTMA. We have factory operations in Trinidad and the United States and provide full service roofing for industrial, residential, commercial, and export markets. So, on to roofing, we ask the question, is there such a thing as a hurricane-proof roof? Now, experts will say no, but that doesn't mean you're down and out when it comes to making a roof resilient against storms, right? So the main threat to a roof in a storm is the high-speed wind associated with the storm itself. The high-velocity wind blowing over the roof creates a low pressure zone above the roof, and it creates high pressure around the building from the force of the wind on the building itself. The result of this is a high pressure below and a low pressure above, which causes a suction effect on your roof. In other words, your roof experiences a tendency to want to lift off. So in dealing with this, next slide, please. We essentially have two scenarios to look at. The first one is when constructing a new building, and the second is in dealing with existing roofs and buildings. In the case of a new building, the client is at the mercy of what the designer takes into account. For residential build, the designer is likely a building contractor, draftsman, architect, or an engineer, or any combination of the ones that listed. But how does one ensure that the designer takes into account the effect of hurricanes in the design? Is there a code of practice? Well, in Trinidad, the Caribbean Uniform Building Code and TTBS guide for design and construction of small buildings can offer some guidance, but only guidance, because they're not specific to hurricane resilience. So we must therefore give some attention to what is being designed. So the following is some design criteria that affect the performance of your roof. You have the shape of the roof. Example, a hip roof could actually give you a better resistance than a gable roof. The slope or the grade of the roof, which affects how much uplift that you would experience in certain wind conditions. And the eave overhang, because these overhangs create room for high pressure buildup, which would actually cause your roof to lift off even here. And of course, you have to take into account the design load, which is the load, the forces that will be acting on your roof frame. Now remember, a structure is only as strong as its weakest element. So you might have a large steel beam and thick structural profile roof sheeting, But if the connection between each section then not up to the task, then essentially you're going to have a weak roof. So hence the roof sheeting must be properly fixed to the roof frame. The connection to the roof frame must be sufficient to deal with each other, and the roof frame must be properly secured to the building itself. So you need to ask about your design. Ask your designer what guidelines were followed, and if there was a code that they used. Ask what condition was the roof designed to perform under, for example, wind speed or hurricane category, earthquake, etc. Check and make sure that the specification given in the design with respect to the beam size and purlin size and spacing a member gauge a roof. And ensure that connection details are given. Always do your homework, speak to the specialist, and designers sometimes may not have the best up-to-date information. Also, ensure that your materials are up to the task. Obtain specifications and find out what are the standards that should be followed. For example, all Damer building solution roofing material used for roof profiles meet the TTBS 69-2019 certification with certified for the base metal thickness, tensile strength of the steel, the coating of the aluminum or the zinc, the length, and the consistency of the profile. Another example is our tropical soil profile. It can offer a uplift resistance between 52.5 pounds per square foot to 157.5 pounds per square foot, depending on what fastener arrangement is used on the same type of roof sheeting. It could be the same frame as well. And this slide actually gives you an example of how you could place your fastener to achieve each different rating for uplift. So moving on now to existing roof. Oh yeah, sorry. One more thing, you must ensure the quality of the building. So you need to be qualified and experienced builders, meaning that people who know what they're doing and have the qualification and experience to show you that they do. And always inspect during the construction to ensure that they're doing what it's not supposed to be doing. So it's in quality control. With regard to existing roof, the first thing you could really do is determine what you have. So you would need to conduct an inspection. With regard to roof sheeting, it's recommended that the roof is inspected by a specialist contractor or product provider like Damer Building Solutions. And the roof framing, it's recommended that engineers take a look at the roof, structural engineers, to examine the structure. When looking at the roof sheeting, something that you would need to look at is the gauge and thickness of the existing sheeting, the condition of the existing sheet, the correct fastener type was used, and the number and the spacing and the flashing details over there. And regards to improving your roof cover, well, a few examples of some simple things that could be done to improve. These are not all, they're just a few examples. Yeah, you could replace the roof sheeting, you could replace the fasteners or add more fasteners, or you could add guttering and more downpipe to better control the runoff from the roof to avoid that water getting into your foundation. With regard to roof frame, a few other examples is removing, well, you could actually redo the entire roof by constructing it above the existing, but this is actually a whole new roof. It doesn't require that the building be evacuated. But a few other simple things that could be done. You could add additional members of support where required, or use web stiffeners, the addition of hurricane brackets, and strengthen the connections advised by your structural engineer. One thing to note on improving an existing building, it's really dependent on what you find when you inspect it to determine. Each situation would be unique depending on what is actually existing. So in closing,
Whoops, your audio seems to have dropped out. I don't know. Richard? Well, maybe I'll just fill in and say that that it's important that the roof is resilient against storms and hurricanes. It does require good design and construction. Also, it depends on the quality of the design, the building materials, and if you have an existing roof, make sure you have someone check it out. So I don't know quite what happened to Richard's audio. Mr. Moya?
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you also, Mr. Ott, for assisting and clarifying. All right, so Mr. Siharak, once again, quite wonderful presentation. I am now going to introduce Mr. Mikey Joseph, who will speak on common malpractice, building to code, and offering expert tips from SMAL Engineering Services Limited. Welcome, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you very much, Samaya. Good evening, everyone. And just a little bit about SMAL Engineering Services. We provide design engineering services for buildings and civil engineering projects. We provide construction management, construction supervision, building inspection, and structural evaluations. We are located at 62 to 64 Reform Village, Gasparillo. So we are speaking again the measures to mitigate against flooding, storms, hurricanes, and earthquakes. And basically, we're going to get right into it, and we start with flooding. There are two major low-lying areas in Trinidad and Tobago. The northern floodplains, which is the Caroni Plains and includes Arena and Manzanillo. The southern floodplains, the Oropouche Plains, and the Mayaro and Guayaguari low-lying areas. When building on flat or low-lying lands in these and other areas, we must exercise caution, and the flooding history of the area should be determined. And by that, we mean going to check the flood history back 100, and I would suggest now maybe back to 150 years, because you would have return floods that could surprise you. The next slide would show flooding and the population. These areas, the brighter they are, it would indicate the flood zone and flood prone areas. And the other colors shows where people prefer to live. So apparently we love living close to areas that would have flooding. Once a history of flooding in any area can be or is determined, we should look at the options available. One, the use of stilt columns to elevate the floor above the anticipated flood levels. And for existing structures, you can look at lifting the entranceways, increasing the heights of the doors, and putting stairs so that you can get in and out, and lifting the windows. The use of berms where appropriate on the perimeter of the building lot or building area, including vehicle access point, because sometimes you do have houses that are larger than the houses sited on large pieces of land. Yeah. The use of stilts and stilt posts would require a level of stabilization by the construction of suitable concrete block walls between column lines. This is to bring stability from the wind forces and also to assist in earthquake events. The use of berms will also require sluice gates or other forms of drainage control so as to avoid water entry from external flooded areas by way of drainage outlets. This is an example of houses built on stilts, and you can see the benefits in terms of flood events. This is just another example, and it shows that anybody could build a house on stilts. Bear in mind that the minimum building height from the ground to the top of the ground floor slab is 350 millimeters or 14 inches in keeping with building guidelines. And this has nothing to do with building in low-lying areas now. This should be for every building in order to protect against events, because you do have stable areas where you have some event that could happen that would cause flooding if your ground floor slab is too close to the ground. Flood mitigation. Other measures that can be of great value in reducing home flooding are raise the height of the door entrances and windows, as I mentioned before. Have utilities, service lines, and pipe penetrations closer to the ceiling, or at least higher than the known flood levels. It is important to know at what level you'll have floods in a rain event so that you could secure yourself above that level. Install sumps and mechanical suction pumps where possible. Where available, use windows and doors that can resist flood water pressures. Storms, hurricanes, and earthquakes. Building codes and guidelines were developed to protect the average individual homeowner, developer. However, in Trinidad and Tobago, almost 70% of all structures were built without any approvals, and almost half of those structures will not meet the regulatory standards. And I'm being very modest when I said almost half. The small building code is available as a guideline for draftsmen and competent builders to source safe and adequate construction details in terms of designing your homes. Other projects, you can hire qualified engineers who would then follow the existing international best practice to give you a good design. Here are some tips for making your homes and buildings more resilient. Foundations. Foundations, especially in low-lying areas, must have a 2-inch minimum cover of concrete to all sides of steel and 3 inches at the base. After that, above ground, it averages 1.5 inches cover to all steel. This is an example of a well set out isolated footing. The donut appearing substance on top of the formwork is actually a concrete spacer block, which is used to space your steel between the formwork and any existing surface at the sides, and a similar one bigger for the bottom. The concrete should be the same strength as the concrete you're going to be pouring for the structure. Connectivity. The whole issue of having a strong and stable structure is connectivity. Connectivity of all reinforcement or structural members is critical if structures are to be resilient to wind and earthquake forces. Ensure that the reinforcement in the foundation is adequately connected with the pile and column reinforcement, and the reinforcement for the superstructure is properly connected to the columns. Likewise, any dowel bars to the foundation for block work. This is an example. It's a large structural element, but when you look down, you'll see where the vertical steel is well tied to the bottom layer of steel to secure the column to the base of the foundation. The wall must be properly connected to the floor slabs with proper wall and ring beam reinforcement. The roof frames must be appropriately connected to the walls, and the roof frame to the wall plate or ring beam. Ensure that a proper roof anchoring system is used at all times. Hurricane straps and roof anchor bolts must be adequately sized and properly installed. This is a typical example of what should not happen when using a steel roof. The connections are extremely poor, the welding is inadequate, and this roof would fail in the event that it's subject to any severe forces. This is another example. At the bottom, you'd see that there's no ring beam, and you have the vertical support for the roof resting on block work, and the upper welded connections very, very poor. Here you have a wooden roof connected to the ring beam with anchor bolts However, there's no nut in place, nut and hard washer to secure the wall plate onto the ring beam. However, there's the hurricane strap that seemed to be well in place there. This is just another example of the same where there's no washer and the nut is not tightened. Now, this is very important in terms of what I'm showing you, because most of the time how homeowners and normal people would not be aware of this, except you have somebody inspecting your work, because the builder tend to move so fast, and by the time you reach, probably the whole thing will be sealed. So it's only the event of a hurricane and your roof blowing off, you then wonder what caused it. This structure was affected by erosion from flooding. It faced two hurricane events, one in 2004 and the other in 2005. It's built on a slope, and the water coming down washed away the soil around the foundations, and the building collapsed. And here we have a roof taken off by Hurricane Ivan in Grenada back in 2004. Terry have already spoken to that, and we can see the effects. When building on slopes in flood-prone areas, ensure adequate piling and that the footings are deep enough not to be affected by soil erosion. And that is very serious. Retrofit sidewalls and roofs of and roof wall connections during the dry season should your roof anchorage system seem inadequate, or you suspect that your walls may not be durable enough in terms of the connection to the superstructure. Do not build on river reserves. The river reserves are there to allow for increased drainage in the future, and the future is here because we have flooding taking place all the time. So they cannot access the areas to increase the drainage and bring relief if you're going to be building in the reserves for the river. Build well, retrofit where possible, and secure your investments. Thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Samoya.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. What an enlightening presentation, and I'm sure persons will take your tips and consider it when they are seeking to construct their own homes. So I am now going to introduce our final speaker this evening, Mr. Jaron Michael Hackett, who will speak on the volume of claims filed for insured persons in the past flooding events, the need for additional financial safety with insurance, and the reasonable options available through Guardian Life of the Caribbean. Welcome, Jaron.
Thank you, Samoya, and good evening to all our listeners. Let me just clarify that, well, apologies that we did not get the claim records from the 2018 flooding from Attic, but I would supply all the other relevant information. So natural disasters can greatly affect our financial position. We heard from Terry that the floods in 2018 have costed $2.5 billion in damage. Fast forward to present day, and some victims from the 2018 flooding have not fully recovered. And in some cases, we have persons who have not recovered at all. This is where the need for financial protection for one of your greatest assets, which is your home, comes into play. Home and content insurance plays a significant role in protecting you and your family from economic hardship when, not if, a natural disaster occurs. But before I get into the benefits of homeowners and property insurance, let me first take you through what it is, why it is important, and who benefits the most. Property insurance. This protects us from financial risk of loss from natural disasters, fire, theft, and also external damage to your property. Now, this is important because no one would like to bear the financial risk of rebuilding their home after immense damage was done to their property, right? And in some cases, a total loss, like if your house, God forbid, your house was to burn to the ground. Now, retirees face a greater risk when it comes to loss of this nature, as this loss could drastically impact their wealth, right? So no retiree would like to, or no retiree, sorry, could work for another 45 years to rebuild the home they spent their whole lives putting together. Next point. New and existing homeowners, also mortgagers and mortgagees, right? They should also consider protection of this nature as their new soon-to-be asset. Sorry, they should also consider protection of this nature for their new soon-to-be asset. No one would like to incur the burden of paying off a mortgage and also rebuilding a home after total loss from a natural disaster and a fire. Next slide. So now we're going to dive into two main features and benefits of the homeowner's insurance. So we have homeowners comprehensive, and this will protect your asset, your house, from all perils. So when I say all perils, so we're talking about hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, fires, theft, and in some cases, even the zombie apocalypse, all right? So then we have content insurance. So content insurance protects your most valuable contents, your furniture, your appliances, electronics. We know some of you guys will be very fancy. You bring down your stuff from foreign, you have it there, it's very expensive. You take out your stuff from so and so, it's real nice, and losing it would be drastic. So content insurance will actually protect your contents and the things that that you value the most, even your paintings inside of your home. All right. So apartment owners and renters could also benefit from this service, as even though you may not own the property, the contents inside of the property is of your financial responsibility. So let's take, for example, a situation where you got flooded out, but not by immense rainfall like we had today, but by one of your neighbors or the other apartment pipe burst, right, and flood out your entire apartment. Content insurance would help in replacing the damage, replacing the financial damage caused by this tragedy. All right, next slide. So we're just going to dive in some added benefits with property and content insurance. So you do have local and worldwide coverage for your electronics, musical items, and jewelry. You also have, next point, public liability, where any harm that comes to the public whilst on your property, they will be covered for, so that financial responsibility will not solely rest on you. And also public negligence damage to your property. If, God forbid, someone was reversing into your street, probably bounced down your expensive gate, this would also cover that type of damage. Next point. So one key point to note is of underinsurance, right? So you want to insure your property, right, at its full value, because your property appreciates, and at some point in time you would like to get an evaluation to determine the true cost of your property, so that the property is insured for its full value, as underinsuring your property can expose you and your family to financial risk, and in some cases you will have to bear the financial burden when it comes to loss. All right. Next point. Okay, so this is some additional tips where it comes to risk mitigation. You can do electrical inspections, so to ensure that all your electronics are functioning properly. Install some security cameras, alarms, smoke detectors to protect against fires that can be caused and break-ins. I will also note that if you do install hurricane-proof and flood-proof doors and windows, that this will be considered against your insurance premium, and you would or can receive a reduced rate when it comes to your premium, right? So that is all, folks. Thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, queries, and concerns, feel free to send me an email or you can contact me at the number below. Thank you so much. Back to you, Samoya.
Thank you so much, Jaron. Presentation was wonderful as usual. And now we are going to go into our question and answer segment where we will just review a few of the questions submitted in our chat box. So the first one, this can either go for Terry or Richard. The first question says, would my roof be secured once my windows and doors hold up in a hurricane, even if the roof was not immaculately constructed?
Well, maybe, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, if you can hear me properly, I don't know. I think my internet is a bit slow down. The answer is no. Your roof needs to be constructed properly. I imagine the reason for the question is that as we explained earlier, once you have that breach in either your windows or doors, you have a drastic increase in pressure below the roof. So that would almost certainly ensure that your roof goes away. But it's not the only fault that the roof experiences during a storm or during high wind. The actual suction is actually produced by the low pressure zone above the roof during high wind. It's just that when you have that breach, you have an increased high pressure below the roof. So it drastically increases the force on your roof, but it's not the only fault. So you need to have a properly constructed roof as well.
Terry?
I hope that was.
Yeah, I think in a lot of these cases, it's a matter of the risk profile. And if your roof is just sitting on there without any sort of connection, then you can't have it absolutely go off whether your windows and doors fail or not. If you have a 30-degree pitch on the roof, generally speaking, the positive and negative forces on the roof will balance out. So your chances of surviving a lot better. One thing you can be assured of is if the windows and doors are not properly secured, then you really don't stand a chance. So I would say that the first thing to do is make sure your windows and doors are strong, and also make sure that the roof is properly secured. You need both.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question on the roofing issue. This one says, does the slope of the roof matter when constructing within the hurricane belt?
Absolutely, it does.
Definitely.
Yeah, if you look at wind tunnel
not just within the hurricane belt, I think.
Yeah, in fact, even here in Trinidad recently, some roofs disappeared in Chase Village from a windstorm. So you don't necessarily need to have a very destructive hurricane. But typically a 30-degree slope, which by the way is pretty much what the chattel houses had years ago, hundreds of years ago, and so a 30-degree slope is the way to go. Also, I think Richard mentioned before that hip roofs are a lot better than gable roofs, and so again, you're going to have a much better chance of survival.
Okay, thank you so much for your response. Another question. I have seen laminate glass that failed. What guarantee do I have if I explore the option of laminate glass within my windows and doors? That's for you, Terry.
Yes, well, laminate glass comes in various thicknesses, and most of this laminate glass sold throughout the Caribbean is very thin, and also the laminate is thin and it's not properly secured. So in many cases, the laminate glass will fail. In our particular case, the thinnest one, I showed you the video with the people, with that fake thief hammering away at it. That particular laminate is still, even though it's our thinnest laminate, it's still 3 to 6 times as thick as typically the laminates that are sold throughout the region. So the thickness and strength of the laminate glass is very important. How do you tell whether it's strong enough or not? You've got to test it. And that's why we had a homeowner, for instance, who looked at some other laminate glass and took a little hammer to it and had took a swipe, and it fell apart. So I showed you how you can do testing. If you don't have a laboratory, which most people don't, you can then use a hammer or a sledgehammer, get a small window or test one of them and see whether it stands up or not.
Okay, thank you so much. This question says, are hurricane shutters advised, or is it a feasible option during a hurricane?
Well, in fact, in a low category hurricane shutters can be fine. But as the hurricane gets stronger, most of the hurricane shutters are only rated to 140 miles an hour if they're properly installed. In many cases, they're not properly installed. And what we found in Hurricane Irma, in particular in St. Martin, where they had a lot of hurricane shutters, 80 to 90% of all hurricane shutters failed. And the reason is they were improperly installed. In many cases, they were larger than they should have been, so they actually did not meet spec. And in other cases, the wind loads were a lot higher than the hurricane shutters were rated for. In fact, we had one building where we had installed our high impact hurricane resistant windows. And the homeowner decided that he was going to protect the glass. So he started putting hurricane shutters on, and he got about halfway around the building before he ran out of money and time. And when Hurricane Irma hit, it had to go at both the hurricane shutters and the windows. We went back the next day and we found out that the windows that did not have hurricane shutters had taken many blows. They were cracked and in many cases cracked, but there was no failure. All of the windows, every single one of the windows with hurricane shutters had acted like battering rams and knocked out the glass, and then the hurricane shutters failed. And so there wasn't a single hurricane shutter or piece of glass left in that part of the building, and the building failed. So to my mind, from what I've seen in St. Martin and Anguilla and Dominica and so on, I would say you're better off to get the proper windows and doors and forget about the hurricane shutters. They act like they seem to be provide a good level of security, but in fact, as the hurricane intensifies, they will almost inevitably fail.
Okay, thank you so much, Terry. I have 2 questions for Jaron Hackett regarding insurance. The first question says, when obtaining insurance, are persons advised of the savings for best practice when building?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Yes, the question is, when obtaining insurance, are persons advised of the savings for best practice when building?
Okay, the savings in terms of premiums?
I believe that's what they're asking. What savings will they be benefiting from when they take home insurance, if I'm understanding it clearly?
Okay. Well, I guess to answer that question, I would say, well, insurance premiums are considered against your home, and the value of your home, and the things that you do to mitigate the risk of floods and hurricanes. I mean, that would be considered against your insurance premium if you, like, when you're building, and that would reduce the cost of your insurance premium. I hope I answered that question correctly. I didn't quite understand.
Maybe I can just add to that, because in Antigua,
Sure.
where the hurricane insurance is very, very expensive,
Okay.
we operate throughout the Caribbean, and we were told that if we would provide a certification as far as the windows and doors, the insurance premium would be reduced by 40%. And in fact, we have provided those. And so we're working with insurers to make sure that they understand the reduction in risk and potential loss. We'll have those discussions with Guardian too. But I think the answer is yes.
Well, yes. In those cases, we do consider, as I said, we do consider the risk mitigation factors when persons install windows, doors, roofs that protect them against natural disasters. Further things that would even like smoke detectors and fire alarms, security systems, all these things. We do consider those factors against your insurance premium.
Okay, thank you, Jaron. The next question is it cheaper to get house insurance in an area that is not flood prone?
Well, I would say, well, to be quite honest, I can't give a direct answer to that question, but I would say, remember that your home insurance will not only cover you for flood, it will also cover you for other things, fire, theft, hurricanes, though, I mean, it will be considered, if you say, well, I don't live in a flood prone area, so my chances of getting flooded out are nil, and maybe you should reduce my premiums. You can never tell what other hazards you'll be prone to. So your coverage will be against all perils and not just flooding. So, but it might be considered against your insurance premium.
But I guess Mikey was making the point earlier that even if you aren't in a flood zone, you can have extreme rain fall in a particular area, and areas that are not prone to flooding can still flood. So
right.
He was making the point, and I don't know if Mikey, you want to chime in on this, but you've got to be careful and build at the right level.
Most definitely.
All right, and we have
Mikey, you're muted.
You have to unmute, Mikey.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we must build at the right level, and we must have our various structural elements at the right level also. If you have a very shallow foundation and you're even a burst pipeline, your water line, your domestic water line could cause problems. So in terms of that, there are many different elements that work differently that could impact the construction of your home. And one of the best things to do is to have a properly designed building and to ensure that your builder, building contractor, whoever it is supervised. They have some construction specialists looking at what is done to ensure that it's in keeping with the design drawings. So these things, I think in time, maybe the insurance companies could be lobbied to recognize that if you use these builders, this inspection company, whatever it is, you'll have a better structure, less prone to risk, and maybe then they will be able to say, yes, you'll have a 30-40% discount, but all the building elements, the electrical, all these things must be made to such a standard that it's easy to do that.
Well, and if you have an existing home, I think the overall answer is, if you have an existing home and you're not sure, then you need to get someone like Mikey's company in to do inspection, or Damus to look at the roof. And then once you've done that, you can then take some mitigating factors. In many cases, this is not very expensive relative to the cost of the home. The windows and doors would be a small fraction. and similarly, a lot of the roof corrections that can be made. So take those actions first, and then make sure you've got proper insurance. Try and get the lowest premium by doing all of the mitigation. But at least then, if something does go wrong, and a peril you didn't realize, or a broken water line or whatever it might be, you're not going to be wiped out. So really, you need a holistic solution to it all, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. This question is for Mikey. Are there any building codes, guidelines, or regulations at all that are enforced within Trinidad and Tobago?
Oh, that is almost like asking if the Pope is Catholic. There are lots of building regulations. We have the small building code that, the small building guidelines that should have been the building code, but it's lodged at the Bureau of Standards as TTS 599 of 2006. Enforcement is another problem. Years ago, the local government bodies had the responsibility of providing building inspectors to ensure that builders were building in conjunction with design plans approved by the different bodies. That department right now have been stymied through very poor staffing. So we no longer have the building inspector coming around to ensure that builders and even homeowners comply with the laws and get the buildings built in accordance with the approved plans. So the enforcement is a problem, and people building should actually engage someone to seek their interest to ensure that their projects are properly constructed.
So in summary, no.
Yes.
This question is for Kamira. Kamira, what are some of the initiatives that the ODPM is taking to assist in disaster risk reduction at the national level?
Yeah, thank you, Samoya. Right now, the ODPM, in collaboration with a number of government agencies, have launched the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month, which comprises of a number of activities to try to get the conversation started and try to engage persons at the individual, family, and community levels to try to rethink their actions and how they can better prepare for disasters and mitigate some of their risks to flooding and different hazards related to the wet and hurricane seasons. So we have from building your sandbags, making sure that you know what is in your grab and go kits. We have a challenge engaging the public to evacuate within a 3-minute period. So we'll see more about these initiatives coming throughout the month of May. Besides that, the ODPM, we have a mandate just to coordinate efficiently ways in which we can better respond to disasters at the local level. So we have those mechanisms in place, and we're constantly improving how we approach and how we engage with the public, strengthen our early warning systems, and ensuring that we have proper mapping systems in place to guide policy decision making and work that is happening at the local level and with the regional corporations. Thank you
so much. And one final question to you. We are aware of the hurricanes, volcanoes, and our neighboring St. Vincent and the Grenadines and so on. Would you be able to share on some of the other risks that we face in Trinidad and Tobago and how we can sufficiently prepare for those risks and disasters?
Okay, so we have a number of hazards, not just the natural ones, which you mentioned before, so the hurricanes, the volcanoes, the earthquakes. We have also a number of biological hazards, which specific sectors within the ministry. So we liaise directly with the Ministry of Health for this, because even though we have this mandate to provide the necessary response, these are the first line providers in terms of the responders. So we liaise directly with those counterparts. We also have the pandemic is one big example of a risk that we are experiencing right now, and we see where different sectors are affected by different mechanisms. So from socioeconomic factors to political factors, we see all these things coming in play where we have to navigate through and how to better respond, just to try to prevent further negative implications in the future. So I hope that I answered your question effectively.
Yes, thank you so much. I have one final question. I think this can either go to Terry or Richard. The person is asking, our Caribbean neighbors say that we need to open some windows in order to manage the pressure issues. How true is this?
Well, the problem is typically what happens is you lose one window and the pressure then comes in and builds up. So if you lose a window on one side of the house and you have the presence of mind and you can get to the other side of the house to open the window fast enough, then in fact it could be a viable alternative. But the real thing is that you want to keep the hurricane on the outside. So running around and opening windows generally does not work. So that's kind of an old wives' tale, but doesn't work too well. If you are going to do that, you can leave a window open ajar on one side or the other. Problem again is that if you leave it open ajar, it may be pulled wide open, in which case then you have an excessive buildup through a failed window. So best thing is close down the envelope completely and keep the hurricane on the outside.
All right. Thank you all so much. This question and answer segment was quite informative. And ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us. We thank all of our presenters for sharing their insight and expertise. We extend special thanks to Domus Windows and Doors Limited, Damas Building Solutions, SMAL Engineering Services Limited, Guardian Life of the Caribbean, and the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management in collaboration with the NDPPM Multi-Sectoral Committee for making this webinar possible. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit your feedback on the webinar to feedback@domuswindows.com. To connect directly with Domus Windows and Doors Limited, please feel free to visit their website at domuswindows.com or at domus.windows.doors on Instagram and www.facebook.com/domuswindowsanddoors for their Facebook page. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And please remember to wear your masks, stay home, and stay safe. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out. Are we having a virtual party?
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Ayana, thank you so much for having us.
Jared, you need to lobby your friends at ATIC to work with the sector so we could bring about meaningful change and benefits people to do the right thing.
Definitely. They sent me some information, but it wasn't anything that I could have used. I don't know how. They said they have no record at all of 2018 floodings.
Wow.
I found that really, really, really strange. I don't know if it was a switch in administration because they said that they had some recent changes. But I see what I could do and also work with Guardian to consider, well, not consider, but further consider partnering with Domus, where the risk mitigation against insurance premiums are concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but remember, Windows are only one element. So you
yes,
need to
definitely.
the general construction, the design and construction of the structure,
Yeah.
and what measures they take to ensure, or quality assurance measures they take during construction. Yeah.
And yes, I think when we was having this discussion, I think that was Thursday or Friday, against like the certification, you know, that construction certification, that will be a really good, I don't want to say project, but a really good project for us to, or you or Terry, to work on, so that there's some type of certification that goes against building codes, that you can present to insurers when you are getting your home insurance.
All right, guys, I have to run. I see there's an urgent call that I must take. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
We will definitely
Right.
conclude, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
Good night. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.